Welcome to Cram with Camila, where we cram for the RD exam. Today we're going to be talking about energy. As you know, there are different sources of energy, including carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Do you remember that carbs and protein each provide 4 calories per gram, meanwhile fat provides 9 calories per gram? Do you know why? Because fat has more carbons in it. So your brain prefers glucose as a source of energy. But in periods of starvation, your brain can use ketones. Do you know what's called when your body makes glucose out of a non-glucose source? Just think, you are making new glucose. Gluconeogenesis. That's right. To get this energy from glucose, your body has to have some sort of storages, right, where it could tap into. Some of those would include glycogen, that's in your liver and muscles. Also, fat from your adipose tissue. We all know what that's like. And protein sources. When it comes to cellular oxidation, you know that we need enzymes. And enzymes are proteins that are catalysts of reactions. Those enzymes need coenzymes that help activate them. Do you know some coenzymes? Turns out a bunch of B vitamins are coenzymes, including pantothenic acid, thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin. They're all needed to produce energy. Now that you know that some coenzymes include some B vitamins, you probably want to know that a cofactor is usually a non-protein substance. So if a coenzyme is a vitamin, what do you think a cofactor may be? Your thyroid gland releases this hormone called thyroxine. Thyroxine regulates metabolism and rate of oxidation. Thyroxine plays a role in physical and mental development, and it also stimulates glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Our total energy expenditure is composed of basal energy expenditure, thermic effect of food, and physical activity. Our basal energy expenditure is the amount of energy that our body needs to carry out involuntary work. Just think, just for our organs to be functioning, your lungs, your heart, liver, kidneys, everything is working. And that's measured usually at rest, at a fasting state. Now, it's important to know that caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine can all affect that. The physical activity component of your total energy expenditure is the most variable, which is self-explanatory. Different people will have different levels of activity. The basal metabolic rate is measured when somebody is awake, relaxed, and they have normal body temperature, because fever can affect that. The basal metabolic rate measures the amount of O2 consumed. It's affected by 4 things: age, sex, body composition, and endocrine glands. So let's talk about age first. Age is the basal metabolic rate is highest between 0 to 2 years old. And of course, you're gonna decline with age. Also, sex. Women, they have 5 to 10% lower BMR than men. Thanks a lot. What else? Body composition. Okay, so surface area, somebody that's super tall has more surface area than somebody that's not so tall. I would also think if they have lean body mass, right? A lot of muscle versus not. And endocrine glands. So for example, thyroid, which makes me think hyper or hypothyroidism. And I just threw that in there. So please double check, don't take my word for it, but if it's affected by thyroid gland, it will make sense that if you have hyper or hypothyroidism, that it will be affected by that. Fever, growth, lactation, pregnancy, all those things can affect a person's basal metabolic rate. Fever can actually affect the metabolic rate by 7% for each degree of temperature that goes up. That's pretty significant, huh? The basal metabolic rate can be measured using a protein-bound iodine measurement. And what that makes me think of is iodine is needed for preventing goiter, right? Because iodine deficiency can lead to goiter, which is like when your thyroid gland gets super swollen. That's fun to know, and keep in mind that this is not really a nutritional assessment, so it's not something that we are going to be using it in the field. For our resting metabolic rate, which is a little bit different than our basal metabolic rate, we can measure that when a person has rested a little bit or after controlled intake of, say, caffeine, alcohol, or even food. Now, it's gonna be greater than the basal metabolic rate, so about 10 to 20% higher. Okay, so we have our basal when we are just resting, relaxed, several hours after we ate anything or worked out or performed any activity. Meanwhile, our resting is just a short period after. Because it's just a short period after, of course, it's gonna be higher. How much higher? 10 to 20%. We can use the Mifflin-Sanjor equation for that one. We can use the adjusted body weight for underweight, overweight, and obese individuals. For calorimetry, we have direct and indirect calorimetry. For the direct calorimetry, is going to be measuring the amount of heat that our body produces in this sort of like respiratory chamber. That's not practical at all. That seems like a hassle. Meanwhile, indirect calorimetry measures the amount of O2 inhaled and the amount of CO2 exhaled. So O2 consumed, CO2 excreted. Okay, that seems pretty practical. Usually that can be done with a machine. With indirect calorimetry, we can measure which nutrients somebody is consuming for energy. And that is done using this respiratory quotient equation. So you take your V of CO2 and divide it by your V of O2, meaning the CO2 expired divided by the O2 consumed. The quotient for carbohydrates will be 1. The quotient for protein, it's about 0.82, and for fat is 0.7. So if somebody wants to lower the respiratory quotient, do you think that they should consume more carbs at 1, protein at 0.82, or fat at 0.7? They should just consume more fat, right? Because it has the lowest respiratory quotient. The more you know. Let me take you back to the basics. Do you remember what anabolism and catabolism means? Well, you know our body is always trying to keep that state of homeostasis, right? So for that, it's going to do reactions where it builds things or breaks things to release energy or uses energy to put things together. And by things, I use the term super loosely. With that said, anabolism is building things, requires energy. Catabolism is breaking things. So catabolic reactions is breaking down of substance to release energy. But what your body is always like building and breaking. Oh, it makes me think of like osteoblast and osteoclast. Wasn't that fun? Hopefully we'll talk about that again. So all of those reactions, they constantly need energy to happen. So we need to eat, we need to have food to fuel those reactions, right? I was thinking about enzymes and substrates. And you remember how cute you had the enzyme and you had the substrate and they had to fit perfectly? Was that like a lock and key model or something? I don't really. Hormones are chemical messengers. They're released from your endocrine glands, and I don't know if endocrine glands are here. Just think Genesis, like the beginning of a new glucose. And your body can use amino acids and glycerol for that. So, caffeine, nicotine, alcohol can contribute to about a 7 to 15% increase in basal metabolic rate. Does not mean you should have a bunch more caffeine or anything else to increase that. Because remember, you still have to sleep, and if you drink too much coffee, you might not sleep at night. So, do you know the half-life of caffeine, if I'm not mistaken, is about 8 hours? That means it takes about 8 hours for half of that caffeine content to leave your body. Crazy. So glycogenolysis is breaking down glycogen to make glucose, like pss, lysis. Glycogen, oh, pss, breaking it, right? So it's making it out of glycogen that's stored where? In your liver and muscles. Pretty sure that the muscles, the glycogen that you get from your muscles can only be used for the muscles, but the one from your liver can be used anywhere else. Let's double check that in a second. Glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, what do you think is doing to your blood glucose? It's gonna raise it, right? Because it's going to secrete more glucose into your blood.